As you know, Alfred Hitchcock has an uncanny knack for coming up with the unusual in entertainment. Well, The Man Who Knew Too Much can certainly be put in that category.
In the early 30s, my father had been developing, with writer Charles Bennett, a project based around the Bulldog Drummond stories. Bulldog Drummond was a kind of amateur James Bond, and one of the storylines they were working on involved the kidnapping of a baby and international spying. When that project fell through, they kept the frame of the story and reshaped it into The Man Who Knew Too Much. My father directed the first version of The Man Who Knew Too Much in England in 1934. The film was a huge success and really built my father's reputation in England and in America as well. The title was taken from a collection of short stories entitled The Man Who Knew Too Much by English novelist G.K. Chesterton. My father owned some of the stories and simply decided to use the title for the film.
Don't breathe. Don't breathe a word to anyone.
There were a lot of amazing visual sequences in the film.
Bad from outside, smash the window.
A lot of humor, despite the grim subject matter, and a great climactic sequence during a concert at the Albert Hall. The film was released in December 1934 and was very well received. My father discussed doing a remake of it in the United States in 1941, but he set the project aside until 1956. Although I think my father was proud of his original version of The Man Who Knew Too Much, he once told French filmmaker François Truffaut that the first film was done by an amateur and the remake by a professional. As far as the second Man Who Knew Too Much, he didn't want to remake it at all. He didn't want to remake any of his pictures. But he owed Paramount a movie, and they felt that that was the one that could adapt to present day better than any of the others.
Hitch said to me one day, he said, "Do you think we ought to remake The Man Who Knew Too Much?" I said, "The Man Who Knew Too Much? Hitch, I never heard of that title before." He said, "Didn't you ever see any of my pictures before we started working together?" And I said, "Well, I certainly did, so that one." He said, "Well, will you get a print and look at it and see whether we should remake that picture or not?" So I was able to get a print and looked at it. So after I saw this and I went back to the set, and Hitch said, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, Hitch, all I can say is that you and films have progressed together." Well, I never would have said that to him if I'd known how much it would hurt him, but it really hurt him. And forever after that, I was sorry for saying it. And he said, "Well, what about the gun coming around the curtain to fire?" I said, "It's a lot of touches in there, but I'm talking about the whole story." Hitch was, of course, forming in his mind a new story completely. And, of course, that's what we finally ended up making, was a completely new story about the Man Who Knew Too Much.
In the case of The Man Who Knew Too Much, Alfred Hitchcock wouldn't let me see the early picture or read the script. He wanted me to stay away from it. What he did was sit me down and tell me a story. And I took notes from it and went home and did an outline based on that. I had no knowledge at that time of the early picture. If I did, I saw it when I was 12 years old or something and didn't recall it.
Betty, you know your child's going to cost me the match, don't you?
Well, she's your child as well as mine, isn't she?
Well, if I lose this game, I'll disown it forever.
I created those characters partly out of what Hitch told me and partly out of what I envisioned they should be like. Hitch thought intensely about each scene. He'd start to dissect it and tell me how he would use the camera. On the way to the studio, he'd pick one scene and think about it all the way when he was writing, of how many different ways he could do it. And going home, he may have picked the same scene or another one, and so use his time valuably. Hitch would insert his own little Hitchcockian touches, there's no question of it, and that's, of course, what made the films good. They had solid people, they had good dialogue, and mechanically, he had such an expertise for suspense, he inserted it where you least suspected it was going to be.
While Hitch started working on the screenplay, Doc Erickson, our production manager, and I flew to Marrakesh and met with the officials there. You couldn't make a film there until they had read the screenplay and approved it, as is the case in most countries. And I told this story to the superintendent that was in charge of people coming out to make films. Then he told me about Ramadan. He said, you know, Ramadan starts about the 3rd of June, and you will not be able to film here during Ramadan because the people, they go without food or water from sunrise to sunset, and it's very difficult for you. So you must plan to be here early enough to finish filming before Ramadan starts. We went out and looked for locations and selected some places that we thought would be fine for the picture. Then Hitch had to concentrate on the casting. Of course, Hitch and Jimmy Stewart had already agreed to make the men do too much. So that part of the casting was settled before we even started working on the screenplay.
With Jimmy Stewart, they were very, very good friends. And the reason that he loved using him so much is that he typifies the ordinary man. So that a man goes to the movies with his wife, he can sort of imagine him doing the things up on the screen. Because Jimmy Stewart, you know, reminded him of himself.
Then Hitch started talking about casting Jimmy's wife. And he had made up his mind he wanted a Doris Day, and I didn't want Doris Day because I only knew her as a singer. She had a beautiful singer and a beautiful voice, but I knew her as a singer with those famous bands. And I was afraid she couldn't do the dramatic scenes in Marrakesh where she finds that their son has been kidnapped. And so I fought Hitch constantly against her, but he finally went out and cast her in the picture, and she turned out to be absolutely perfect for that scene I was worried about.
The sequence where Doris Day is given the drug before Jimmy Stewart tells her that their son has been kidnapped, Doris Day was excellent in that. She was wonderful in that. And that's when he realized what a good actress she was.
I felt the relationship between the husband and wife was reasonably sound relationship. They loved each other. They had their spats now and then. She made the decision to marry a doctor in a small town instead of staying on the stage. So he didn't force her to. She had, may have regrets about it, but she was solely responsible.
I was at Paramount, and I was kind of under contract there. And I was doing a picture called Vagabond King. And Bob Burks was the cameraman. And of course, Bob had worked with Hitchcock. And apparently, Hitch asked Bob, he says, do you know of any young art directors you think I'd get along with and would like? And he says, yeah, I'm working with one right now. Naturally, in my wildest dreams, I never thought I'd ever work with Alfred Hitchcock. I had a meeting with him, and we got along fine, and so he chose me to do The Man Who Knew Too Much. It was quite an experience. And, oh, gee, it was hot. You know, you just couldn't stand on the tarmac. You had to get in shade. Towards the end of the picture, Hitch was directing from the front seat of an old Chevrolet. And the driver would honk the horn, and then the assistant would come over, and Hitch would tell him what they wanted him to do. I'll never forget. In those days, we all, especially with Hitch, we all wore suits and ties. You know, nowadays, you got to look like you're shot out of a cannon. They think you're going to a funeral if you wear a jacket and a tie. But Marrakesh was the first time I've ever seen Hitch in a T-shirt. But it was buttoned right up, you know, but it was short sleeve. And he was cute. I remember, and the flies buzzing around. He could do it better than me, but he was blowing the flies off of him with that.
When Hitch came to Marrakesh, he said, they asked Doc to send down some Dover sole from London. And I said, Hitch, you won't have to have it sent down from London. I said, we're going to take you to dinner tonight, and they have the best Dover sole in the world. He said, I don't believe it. So we went to this restaurant. We walked in, and of course, everybody was sitting on the floor around. It's just, you mean I'm going to sit on the floor? I said, no, Hitch, they have another room where people that want to have tables. Well, that scene was always in, but Hitch decided to do it that way when he saw the way people sat on the floor.
I think my father always wanted to have humor in his pictures. And in The Man Who Knew Too Much, obviously the greatest humor is the eating in the restaurant. And I think he and Jimmy just worked that out by themselves.
Doris Day's my wife. And the story is about our trip abroad that started out as a holiday and ended up as a nightmare.
When Louis Bernard is murdered, my father wanted the paint on his face to come off on Jimmy Stewart's hands. They made many tests, but the makeup just would not come off. So finally, Daniel Gelin, who portrayed the victim, came up with a great idea. He said Jimmy Stewart should have white powder on his hands, and that's how they did it. And it looks very convincing.
As Ramadan came closer and closer, and the people began to realize that we rushed all of Hitchcock's work to have it done for Ramadan. And as soon as he finished, then he flew out for London to get ready to work in Royal Albert Hall. And I started my work there, and I had about 10 days' work there, but after the 5th day, we were now in the 3rd day of Ramadan. And the people were getting very unruly. And on the 4th morning when I arrived, there were armed, uniformed soldiers on the roofs of all the buildings to be able to control the crowd. And we started working, but before noon, the superintendent came to me and he said, "Mr. Coleman, would you please stop now because I'm not going to be able to control the people." So we had to stop. I had about, I guess 2 or 3 days' work left, but we had what we needed.
And that was just the beginning. From there, we flew to London for backgrounds of a whole strange series of events that ended up that final night in the great concert hall, where the cue for murder was one single crash of the cymbals.
Before I arrived in London, I sent Kay Selby, who was the head of the Paramount office in London, the scenes about the taxidermist shop. And when we arrived, she said, "I have it all set for you to go and see the taxidermist shop." So we got in a car and drove to a place, and we got in the car and I looked at this beautiful, great big glass window, a beautiful polished wooden floor with white bear rugs on the floor and heads and things all in the walls. A beautiful place, not what we wanted at all. And Kay Selby went to the office and brought out a man in a tailcoat and in morning clothes, and introduced me to him. And he says, "Why can't you Americans do things in the proper English manner?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Why couldn't you have communicated with me directly?" I said, "Kay, I don't have to listen to this kind of story." I said, "Let's get the hell out of here." So I turned and walked out. I said, "Kay, didn't you understand that this had to be in a working shop?" So she said, "I have one place for you to see. It's in the low rent district." And we went out, it was just ideal, absolutely perfect for us. And the owner of this place, he said, "It's fine." He says, "Well, I won't accept a penny for you, and I'd like you to use my shop."
My father loved to put a few little red herrings in his pictures, such as using the name Ambrose Chapel and them thinking it was a taxidermist, and then finding out it's a plate. My father felt that he had to have a break in the suspense.
Because you can only take suspense for a certain amount of time. It can't stay with you for an hour and a half or 2-hour movie. You have to relieve it.
And the one obvious example was Ambrose Chapel. And, then they go on this wild goose chase.
Hitch was a master at going on location and getting all the long shots and everything. And in other words, he gets the meat on location, and then you do everything else back in the comfort of the stages. Whenever he shot the exterior of a building that I had to do the interior of, I always went inside and took some pictures and took a look at the building, because many times Hitch would ask me, "Bummy, does this set look anything like the interior of the building we filmed, the exterior of, And apparently he'd looked at it, and I'd say yes. So, I was very careful that way. One thing about Hitch, when you did a set for him, he shot the whole set, you know what I mean? Some directors, you do a nice set and they get themselves over in the corner, and that's all you ever see is the corner. I learned how Hitch laid out shots, how he cut films. Hitch shot very little film, And there's really only one way you could put it together. I mean, from what I noticed, you know, he knew what he wanted to do so well.
My father, of course, knew the Albert Hall so well because he was a great lover of music when he was a young boy in England, and he loved to use famous places in his movies. He loved to travel early on. He and my mother really enjoyed traveling, and we would go to Switzerland almost every Christmas. So he would find a place, and then he would see how he could incorporate it into the story.
We started shooting in Albert Hall, and we shot in the lobby and the long shots in the hall. And then we did the boxes, and a lot of that stuff I reproduced back at the studio. Hitch liked to go up to a certain point, and then I'd have to duplicate it back here.
More than any of the other Herman Hitchcock collaborations, music is almost a character in The Man Who Knew Too Much. It's very important. It's right there in the opening titles, letting us know that music is going to be key to this story. And naturally, that was a wonderful opportunity for Bernard Herrmann because he loved projects when music was featured very prominently. And it's a sign of just how much Hitchcock trusted Herrmann after just one previous collaboration. The filming went very well, and the orchestra was very impressed with Bernard Herrmann's knowledge, his musicality, his ability to work in both the film and concert media. And at the end of filming, the London Symphony gave him a book which they inscribed to Bernard Herrmann, the man who knows so much. I think it's no accident that there is so little dramatic scoring in The Man Who Knew Too Much because Herrmann knew how important music was going to be at the climax. So he doesn't overscore the rest of the film. In a way, he makes us wait for the big musical statement. There are, however, a few wonderful cues before that sequence at the Albert Hall. There's a very exciting main title which utilizes percussion very effectively and dramatically. And there are some very imaginative Herrmann cues throughout the score. For example, when they get the telephone call about the kidnapping, there's a wonderful cue that sort of looks ahead to some of the Herrmann music for films like, say, Vertigo, for example. Or when Jimmy Stewart is going to the taxidermist, there's a wonderful kind of music that Herrmann could write to suggest the anxiety that people were feeling in a situation, as well as to make that anxiety be felt in the audience as well. But by and large, Herrmann makes us wait until we reach the Albert Hall, and finally music becomes part of the story. The original work was the Storm Clouds Cantata, written by an Australian-born composer named Arthur Benjamin. Hitchcock gave Herrmann the opportunity, if he wished, to write a new concert work for the climax of the film set at the Albert Hall. And it was a wonderful showpiece for a composer. I think 99 out of 100 composers would have jumped at the chance to write something new for this. But Bernard Herrmann so admired the music that had been written by Arthur Benjamin for the earlier 1934 version of The Man Who Knew Too Much that he chose to keep that music. He said that he didn't think anyone could write anything better than what Benjamin had done. Herrmann did reorchestrate the music to some degree. He made it bigger. He took advantage of the fact that he had the London Symphony at his disposal. And I think it is even more effective in the remake than it is in the first film.
In the end of that picture, Jimmy Stewart made a comment that they threw out all the dialogue in the Albert Hall scene. Well, it's not true that they threw it out. We had written the scene and written it with dialogue to see if we could do it silent, or we needed the dialogue and discovered we didn't need it. We had it in case we needed it.
In the original film of The Man Who Knew Too Much, we don't really see the conductor. He isn't a character, if you will. And when Hitchcock reimagined the sequence for the remake, he wanted to make the conductor more featured in the sequence. Well, then the question was, well, who do we hire to be the conductor? The choice was finally made, and I'm guessing it was ultimately Hitchcock's decision to use Bernard Herrmann, the man who was writing the score for the movie. So it becomes almost an in-joke that we have the composer of the dramatic score who is appearing as himself conducting the London Symphony, and he's featured rather prominently in the sequence.
The idea to have the cymbals play such an interesting role in the story was inspired by a comic strip that showed a little man known as the One-Note Man in his daily routine, getting up in the morning, going to work, doing a single note with the cymbals, and going back home.
Hitchcock needed a song for the film, since after all, Doris Day was in the movie, and Paramount wanted a song more than Hitchcock did. So the team of Jay Livingston and Ray Evans was brought in. And Hitchcock met with them and told them very frankly that Paramount wanted a song more than he did in the movie. And he said, I don't know what kind of song I want in the movie, so go write me a song. They did, and they came back with the song Que Sera, Sera. They played it for Hitchcock. He listened in somewhat stern silence. And at the end, he said to them, gentlemen, I told you I did not know what kind of song I wanted. Well, that's the kind of song I want. He walked out. That was it. The song was in the movie, and it proved to be a tremendous commercial success, as well as, I think, a very dramatically effective one. In fact, it went on to win the Academy Award for the Best Song of 1956.
We consciously thought about Doris Day and a relationship with her husband as far as leaving the professional circuit that she did. And she missed something in her life. As the events took place, she got it back, at least for a short time.
We accomplished everything we set out to do in the Man Who Knew Too Much. I don't think we gave up anything at all.
I love the movie The Man Who Knew Too Much. I didn't remember the first one because I was too young. So I love the second one. That's one of my favorite movies. Movies meant a tremendous amount to my father and my mother because that was their life. We keep going to see his movies because they are pure entertainment.
He was a master filmmaker, you know. I mean, on every film I worked with Hitch, he knew every shot. Every shot really was in his mind. I remember Hitch is sitting there, you know, and they're lighting. And I said, Hitch, what are you thinking about? And he says, I'm thinking about my next film.